The ballroom was the kind of beautiful that costs more than most people earn in a year. Crystal chandeliers, pressed suits, conversations held at half volume because power never needs to be loud. I was at the mirror in our suite, earrings in, waiting for my husband to walk back through the door. He didn't. The suite behind me was empty in a way that had weight to it, the particular silence of a room where something has already gone wrong and is simply waiting for you to catch up. I looked at myself in that mirror. Emerald gown, hair up, everything composed and deliberate, the way I have always made myself appear in the spaces he moves through. My name is Jada Manuels. To his world, I am the boss's wife. Decorative, protected, peripheral. To my husband, I am the woman he loves and has spent 3 years trying to keep safe from everything he is. But that night, I was the only person in that building willing to move. So I picked up my clutch, smoothed the front of my gown, and walked out the door to go get him back. Luxury is a mask, but here we take it off. Welcome to the heart of Seoul. We're building a community of those who look deeper. Join the diary today. Regular, riveting stories are officially in session. The gala was exactly what it always was. Beautiful in the way that things built on dangerous money tend to be beautiful. Excessive, precise, and cold underneath the warmth of the lighting. I had attended 11 of these events in 3 years of marriage, and I had learned to move through them the way Tae-shik moved through everything, with composure that reveals nothing and observed everything. He had left the suite at 9:15 to meet briefly with 2 men in the lower hall. Routine, he said. 30 minutes, he said. I had nodded and returned to the mirror and thought nothing of it because 30 minutes in his world was a reliable unit of time. By 10:10, I was thinking something of it. I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I gave it another 5 minutes the way you give a storm another 5 minutes before you close the windows, not because you believe it won't rain, but because you are still hoping to be wrong. At 10:15, I called his personal line. It rang twice and went to voicemail. I called his head of security. Same result. I set my phone down on the vanity and looked at my reflection and had a quiet internal conversation with myself that lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then I picked the phone back up and called a different number. I had accumulated certain contacts over 3 years that Tae-shik didn't know about, not out of deception, but out of the particular self-sufficiency of a woman who understands that the people who love you most are also the most motivated to keep you uninformed. The man who answered was named Cho. He owed me a debt from a situation I had handled discreetly 18 months ago, and he had been waiting, I suspected, for the call that would settle it. I gave him 30 seconds. He gave me a location in 11 words and a floor number. I thanked him and ended the call. The suite was very quiet around me. Below, through the tall windows, the city continued its indifferent glittering. Somewhere in this building, in a room on a floor I had never visited, my husband was being held by people who had looked at our marriage and decided it was a liability. I thought about calling someone. One of his lieutenants, still somewhere in the ballroom, drinking and deliberating and doing the careful political mathematics of men who are afraid to move before they are certain. By the time they reach certainty, the window would be closed. I stood up. I checked my reflection once, the same way I always do, not for reassurance, but for accuracy. Emerald gown, hair up, clutch in hand. The slight tear along the slit hadn't happened yet, but the evening was young. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the hallway without telling a single person where I was going. They would know soon enough. They had not planned for me because they had not taken me seriously enough to plan for me. That was their first mistake, and it was not a small one. I took the service elevator to the basement level, not because I had been shown it, but because 3 years of attending events in buildings like this one had taught me that the geography of power is consistent. The public floors are built for impression, the lower levels are built for function, and the people who control a space always need a way to move through it without being seen by the people they are performing for. I had simply paid attention to where those routes were, every time, in every building. The way you quietly learn the exits of any room you're not entirely sure you're safe in. The basement corridor smelled like linen and industrial cleaning product. Long, fluorescent, empty. My heels were quiet on the concrete. I had chosen them that way, though Tae-shik had no reason to know that was a consideration I made. Cho had said sub-level 2, East Corridor, the room marked with a service tag in Korean. I had enough of the language to navigate signage, another thing I had acquired quietly and mentioned to no one. Tae-shik had offered me to teach me Korean in the first year of our marriage. I had told him I was learning slowly on my own. That was partly true. The part I omitted was how much I had already learned and why. A woman in her husband's world who was never quite invited all the way in learns to build her own maps. I moved through the corridor with my clutch held close and my breathing even. I passed 2 hotel staff who looked at my gown with the mild confusion of people encountering something out of context, and I returned their glances with the particular expression that communicates I belong here more than you have questions, a look I perfected at the first gala out of pure survival instinct. They said nothing. I continued walking. The East Corridor branched left off the main passage, narrower with fewer lights, and the specific quality of air that suggested the ventilation didn't quite reach this far. I counted the doors. Service tag, Korean characters, 3rd door on the right, exactly where Cho had said it would be. I stopped outside it. From within, I could hear the low register of voices, at least 2, possibly 3. Tae-shik's was not among them, which meant he was either restrained or being kept deliberately silent. Neither option improved my mood. I opened my clutch, checked its contents with the brief, practical attention of someone confirming what they already know is there. Then I closed it. I placed my hand on the door. I was not afraid. I want to be precise about that. It was not the absence of fear that I had managed to perform into existence. It was something quieter and more durable than courage. It was certainty. I pushed the door open and walked in. The room was smaller than I expected and larger than it needed to be for what was happening inside it. Tae-shik was seated in a chair near the far wall, wrists bound behind him with the kind of restraint that communicates intent rather than improvisation. His tuxedo was still immaculate. They hadn't touched him physically, which told me this was about message, not punishment. Not yet. His eyes found me the instant the door opened, and what moved across his face in that first half-second was not relief. It was something closer to the expression of a man who has just understood a language he thought he didn't speak. 2 men stood between us, both masked, both armed, though neither had raised a weapon yet, because they had opened the door expecting a hotel attendant and received, instead, a woman in an emerald gown who had not broken her stride coming through it. That half-second of recalibration was all I needed. I have never spoken publicly about what I know how to do or where I learned it. I will not start now. What I will say is that the first man made the mistake of reaching for his weapon before he had fully decided what to do with me, and indecision in a small room is a liability that moves faster than intention. He didn't complete the reach. The second man was faster and smarter, which made him marginally more difficult and ultimately no different in outcome. The room was quiet within 40 seconds of my entering it. Both men were on the ground, one considerably more cooperative about it than the other. I smoothed the front of my gown. The slit had torn slightly in the movement. I noted it the way you notice scuff on a shoe, cosmetic, irrelevant. I walked to Tae-shik and crouched in front of him and worked the restraint with a small blade from my clutch, the first of the 2 things I never attend these events without. He said nothing while I worked. I said nothing either. The room held the particular silence of 2 people who have just discovered they are in the presence of something they need a moment to absorb. When his hands were free, he brought them forward slowly, and for a long moment he simply looked at me, not with the shock of a stranger, with the disorientation of a man realizing that the person he thought he knew completely has just revealed a room he didn't know existed in a house he thought he had memorized. "Jada," he said. "Just my name, the way you say something when language feels insufficient, but you need to make a sound anyway." "We should go," I said. "We can talk in the car." I stood and offered him my hand. He took it, and I noticed, as he rose, that he held it differently than he usually did. Not protective, not careful, like an equal.
3 floors above the room where his plan had just failed, Elder Beck was still at the gala. That was important to understand about him. He had not hidden, he had not positioned himself near an exit or arranged a contingency that required his absence. He was standing near the east window with a glass of Beck Seju and a conversation about real estate, because a man who believes he is righteous does not behave like a man who believes he is guilty. Elder Beck orchestrated the kidnapping of Kwon Tae-shik with the full conviction of someone performing a necessary correction, and people who believe they are correcting something do not run. He was 61 years old. He had been inside the organization for 34 of those years, longer than Tae-shik was alive when he first came to Elder Beck as a young man worth investing in. That history was the foundation of everything Elder Beck believed he was owed and everything he believed he understood about what the syndicate required to survive. His objection to Jada was not personal. He would have said that sincerely, and he would have been sincere. It was structural, ideological. A boss in Elder Beck's architecture of the world was a symbol as much as a function, and a symbol derived its power from legibility, from being recognizable to the people it was meant to represent. Kwon Tae-shik had chosen Jada manuals from outside their world, outside their culture, outside every understood boundary of what a boss's wife was supposed to be. To Elder Beck, this was not love, it was negligence dressed in personal happiness. He had raised the concern twice through proper channels in the early months of the marriage. Quietly, respectfully, he had been acknowledged and dismissed both times, which Tae-shik believed was the end of the conversation, and Elder Beck understood to be the beginning of a longer one. He had spent 26 months being patient. He had watched Jada at 11 galas, 12 private dinners, and 4 syndicate-adjacent functions. He had watched her watch the room, the careful, accumulating attention of someone building a map they weren't supposed to have, and he had categorized it as social ambition, the wife learning to perform belonging. It had not occurred to him to categorize it as anything more than that. This was not stupidity. Elder Beck was not a stupid man. It was the specific blindness that comes from certainty, the way a strongly held conclusion will quietly reorganize incoming evidence until everything confirms what you already believe. He had believed Jada Manuel's was peripheral, decorative, a weakness wearing an evening gown. He had built an entire plan on that belief. Across the ballroom, his phone vibrated once. He glanced at it, read the message, set his glass down on the nearest surface with the careful steadiness of a man absorbing information he had not prepared to receive. The room was still ongoing around him, beautiful, expensive, indifferent. Elder Beck stood very still and began, for the first time in 26 months, to recalculate. We did not leave immediately. Tae-shik understood why without my having to explain it. I had taken his hand and led him out of that basement room, and we had moved together through the service corridor and back toward the elevator. And then I had pressed the button for the ballroom level instead of the parking garage, and he had looked at me once and said nothing, because 3 years of marriage had given him enough of my language to know that I was not finished. Elder Beck was exactly where I expected him to be. Near the east window, composed, a glass held loosely in one hand and the careful stillness of a man who has recently received bad news and is deciding how to wear it. He saw us cross the ballroom toward him, and something moved through his expression. Not fear, not quite. The specific recalibration of a man whose model of the world has just been contradicted by direct evidence and who is still, even now, looking for an alternative explanation. I stopped in front of him. Tae-shik stood beside me, not in front, not slightly ahead the way he usually positioned himself in rooms like this one, beside. Elder Beck looked at me with the measured attention he had probably never fully extended in my direction before tonight. I returned it without decoration. "You believed I was the weakness," I said. I kept my voice at the register of ordinary conversation, nothing performed, nothing sharp enough to draw the attention of the surrounding room. "You built your entire plan around that belief." He said nothing immediately. Elder Beck was too disciplined for immediate responses. I understand the argument you were making, I continued. I've understood it since the third gala. A boss whose wife exists outside the expected boundaries becomes a symbol of misalignment. The organization loses legibility. You weren't wrong about the logic. I paused. You were wrong about me. Mrs. Kwan, he began. I know every exit in this building, I said. I have working relationships with 3 people on your internal council that you don't know about. I speak enough Korean to have understood every conversation in my presence that was conducted in it under the assumption that I couldn't follow. I let that land at its own pace. I have been paying attention since the day I walked into this world, not because I was told to, because I understood that attention was the only currency available to me in rooms where I wasn't supposed to matter. The ballroom moved around us, indifferent and glittering. Elder Bach looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Tae-shik, then back at me with the expression of a man revising a document he thought was already final. The organization will have questions, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed, and you will answer them honestly, because the alternative is explaining tonight in a context where I am present for the explanation. I held his gaze until he looked away first. Then I took my husband's hand, and we walked toward the exit together, and I did not look back. The car was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet after something loud has happened in them, not empty, but full of the shape of everything that had just occurred. Tae-shik sat beside me in the back seat, his wrists resting on his knees, his tuxedo still precise in the way that expensive things maintain their appearance even after the evening has gone completely wrong. The city moved past the windows in its usual indifferent procession of light and shadow. Our driver said nothing. He understood, as all good drivers in this world understand, that the back seat was not his to occupy. Tae-shik spoke first. He said my name, and then he said thank you, and I could hear in the architecture of both that he meant something larger than the words available to him, that he was reaching for language adequate to the evening and finding the options insufficient. I let the thank you exist for a moment without responding to it. Then I said, "Why didn't you tell me about Elder Bach?" He turned to look at me. I kept my eyes on the window. I knew he was a problem. I had known for over a year. I watched him watch me at every event, cataloged every conversation he steered away from me, noticed every room where his influence created a particular kind of cold. I knew what he thought of me, and I understood what he was capable of. I paused. Did you know? A beat. Yes. How long? 14 months. I nodded slowly. The city outside offered nothing useful, just its lights, just its motion, just its profound disinterest in the interior lives of the people moving through it. I said that I carried that for 14 months, and every morning you sat across from me at breakfast and discussed everything except that. I was handling it, he said. The explanation was genuine. That's the difficult part. It was not an excuse dressed as a reason. He had genuinely believed that absorption was the same as protection. I know you were, I said. That's not what I'm asking. I turned to look at him then, directly, the way I had looked at Elder Bach across the ballroom, without decoration, without the careful softening I sometimes applied to difficult things in our marriage. I'm asking why you decided that handling it meant handling it without me, why you looked at what I am, what I have always been, whether you saw it clearly or not, and concluded that the correct thing was to stand in front of it rather than beside it. He didn't answer immediately. I respected that. Tae-shik at his best was a man who understood the difference between a response and an answer and knew which one the moment required. The car moved through an intersection. The light was green. I didn't want you to have to live in it, the weight of it, he said finally. I know, I said quietly, but Tae-shik, I already live in it. I have always lived in it. I looked back at the window. I just lived in it alone. We were home before he began. He had asked the driver to take the long route without explaining why, and I had not asked why. I understood. Some conversations required a particular privacy of motion, the sense that the world is moving around you while you remain still enough to say the things that have been waiting the longest.
He started with Elder Bach. The first conversation, 14 months ago, in a private room after a council meeting. The specific language Elder Bach had used, measured, traditional, draped in the vocabulary of organizational integrity, the implicit ultimatum underneath the respectful phrasing. Taishik had dismissed it formally and absorbed it privately, carrying it home that evening and setting it down somewhere inside himself where he believed I wouldn't find it. Then he told me about the second conversation and the third, the gradual escalation that looked, from the outside, like routine organizational tension and felt, from the inside, like a man being slowly informed that his marriage was a problem requiring a solution. He told me about the night 6 months ago when he had found evidence that Elder Bach was building alliances around the objection, quietly, patiently, with the organizational fluency of someone who had been inside the syndicate for 3 decades and understood exactly how consensus was manufactured. Taishik had spent 3 weeks neutralizing what he could reach and accepting what he couldn't, all without changing a single thing about breakfast. He told me about the threats that had been made adjacent to my name. Not direct, Elder Bach was too precise for directness, but present enough that Taishik had hired 2 additional people to maintain a perimeter around my daily life that I had attributed to routine security adjustment. I listened to all of it, without interrupting, without flinching, without offering him the performance of composure I usually maintained in difficult moments, because this was not a moment that required performance. It required presence. I simply sat beside him in the moving car and received every word he had been carrying and let him feel the difference between being heard and being managed. When he finished, the city outside had thinned. We were close to home. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. It was the 3rd time a version of that sentence had appeared in the evening, and this time it arrived without defense, just the plain, tired truth of a man who has been holding something heavy for too long and has finally set it down. "I know," I said, and then, because the evening had earned honesty in both directions, "I've been doing the same thing." He turned to look at me. The contacts, the language, the maps I made of every building. I met his eyes. I told myself it was self-sufficiency, but some of it was distance, staying capable enough that I would never have to ask you for anything, because asking felt like confirming what everyone in your world already believed about me. The car stopped. Neither of us moved immediately. We sat in the driveway of our home in the particular silence of 2 people who have just shown each other the thing they had been most carefully concealing, and found, on the other side of that exposure, that they were still recognizably themselves. Taishik reached over and took my hand. Not the way he had in the basement, not like an equal finding its mirror, something quieter than that, something that had no name except that it was the most honest gesture of our entire marriage. We sat there for a while longer before going inside. Elder Bach's removal was announced through the organization the following morning. Not loudly. Nothing in this world moved loudly when it moved with intention. It was communicated through the specific channels that carried weight. A meeting canceled, a standing invitation quietly rescinded, 2 phone calls from Taishik's office that lasted under 3 minutes each and required no elaboration. The men who received those calls understood immediately. The men who didn't receive them understood by the end of the day, through the particular mathematics of absence that operates in closed organizations like weather. You don't see it directly, but you feel the pressure change. The responses came in 3 forms. The first was acceptance. The majority, men who respected Elder Bach's position without being ideologically aligned with his conclusions, received the signal and recalibrated without friction. These were practical men. They had watched the events of the previous evening move through the building's rumor channels by morning, the story condensing as it traveled, until what remained was its essential truth. The boss had been taken, and his wife had walked in alone and walked him out. Practically minded men know how to update their assessments when the evidence is that unambiguous.
The second response was silence. A smaller group, Elderbach's closer affiliates, went quiet in the deliberate way that communicates neither acceptance nor opposition. They were watching, deciding. Taishik had expected this and had prepared for it, and for the first time, he prepared for it with me in the room. We sat together at the desk in his private office the morning after, the city visible through the tall windows behind him, and he walked me through every name on the uncertain list, their histories, their motivations, the specific currencies of loyalty and self-interest that moved each of them. I listened with the full attention I had always applied to this world from its edges, and I offered what I had accumulated from those edges. Observations about 3 of the men that Taishik did not have, small details of behavior and body language noticed across 11 galas that recontextualized things he thought he already understood. He wrote 2 of them down. The third response was a test. It came 4 days later from a middle-level figure named Shin, who had apparently decided that the transition represented an opportunity rather than a warning. He moved against a revenue arrangement in a way that was too deliberate to be accidental and too small to justify a disproportionate response. A probe, designed to measure the new parameters. I was the one who identified the appropriate counter before Taishik did. Not a confrontation, a redirection, using a relationship I had with one of Shin's closer associates to make the organizational cost of continued testing quietly, clearly legible. Within 48 hours, Shin's probe reversed itself, without a word exchanged between him and Taishik directly. Taishik looked at me across the desk when it resolved. "You've been ready for this for a long time," he said. "Yes," I said simply. "I have." The gown hangs in the closet still.
I have never taken it to be repaired. The tear along the slit is modest, 2 inches of separated fabric that any competent tailor could close in under 10 minutes. I have walked past it on mornings when the closet is open and thought, briefly, that I should do something about it, and then deliberately decided not to. Some things are more useful as evidence than as restored objects. The gown is a record. I intend to keep it that way. 3 months have passed since the gala. The rhythm of our life returned, the meetings, the events, the careful choreography of existing inside a world that runs on discretion and controlled appearances. From the outside, very little would look different. The same car, the same table at the same restaurant on Thursday evenings, the same composed woman beside the same composed man at functions that require composed people. But the interior of things has been rebuilt entirely. Taishik's office now has a second chair pulled to the desk that was not there before. Not a visitor's chair positioned across from his authority, beside it, at a slight angle, the way you position furniture for people who are working on the same problem from the same direction. I sit in it often, not always. The arrangement is not about obligation or presence performed for its own sake. It is about access, the simple, functional reality that I am now inside the full picture, rather than a carefully edited version of it. He asks my read on people now, directly, without qualifying the question with apology for involving me. I give it directly, without softening my assessment to protect his existing conclusions. We disagree sometimes. Last month, we disagreed significantly about how to handle a particular alliance, and the disagreement lasted 2 days and resolved into a third approach that neither of us had arrived at alone. That felt, more than almost anything else, like the marriage we had been describing to each other without quite achieving. The organization has adjusted, not uniformly, not without friction, but with the pragmatic momentum of any structure that has received clear information about where power actually resides and updated accordingly. I am not invisible in these rooms anymore. I am not performing the edges of things. I move through Taishik's world with the full map in my possession, and the people who once looked past me have learned to look directly. It is not always comfortable. I did not choose it for comfort. Some mornings I stand in front of the open closet and look at the emerald gown, the slight tear, the stillness of it, the way it holds the shape of an evening that changed everything, and I think about the woman who put it on believing it was just another gala.
She was already everything she needed to be that night. She simply hadn't been given the space to demonstrate it. She has the space now. We both do. The people who love you are often more capable than you allow them to be. Tae-shik spent 14 months carrying a weight that was slowly crushing him, not because Jada couldn't handle it, but because he decided for her that she shouldn't have to. And Jada spent 3 years building maps of a world she was never fully invited into, proving her capability in silence to people who hadn't asked for the proof. They almost lost everything, not to an enemy, but to the distance created by two people trying to protect each other from the truth. Here's what that means for you. The people in your corner right now, your partner, your friend, your family, they are probably stronger than you're giving them credit for. And the walls you've built to protect them may be the very thing keeping the relationship from becoming what it could be. Real partnership doesn't mean shielding the people you love from your reality. It means trusting them enough to live in it with you. Stop protecting people from your truth. Start letting them stand beside it. That's not weakness. That's how love actually works. Thanks for watching. You will find the video at the upper right of the video interesting. You should check it out.